have had the fortune of having some pretty dedicated listeners to our first 10 episodes now. And we've had people contact us and ask questions, provide insights, feedback, and we've also had some people ask us to discuss different topics. So, Dr. Elouise, we had something come in from Alex, and I want to read it, and I think this would be a really good topic for us to discuss for people who are on the buy side and then also for ProcureTech providers. So this was Alex's question. I would love to hear your view about user engagement of procurement tech. I see many companies spending fortunes for ProcureTech and not using it at all, and or not using it to its full potential. So to me, I think it makes sense to kind of break this up into two topics. One is companies who buy tech and never even implement it. And then the second piece is companies who buy tech, implement it, but then really, really struggle with adoption and or users not using the system to the full potential.
I love that. And by the way, that second question is how I rebuilt my career starting in 2017, because so many people so many companies had bought source to pay thinking that it would suites and thinking that that would solve all their procurement problems. And the disparity between what was paid and what was delivered and the lack of user adoption is literally that intersection of how I rebuilt my career. So I love this question and I love this topic.
Well, and I would argue that you and I have already talked a fair amount on the show about procurement orchestration, but I think one of the reasons why that has become so popular so quickly is the user experience piece. It's so much simpler and easier to use, which will relate to this topic today. But I think that is really becoming a core fundamental piece in ProcureTech companies that do and don't make it today. So I have a statistic that I want to throw out to you, and you tell me if you think it's realistic. So I host the Voice of Supply Chain show for ISM. You were actually our guest in June, and we talked about your newest book, a little bit different format than normal. But the month before you, I had a gentleman named Frank come on. And the reason I asked him to come on the show is he has a very, very niche business helping organizations set up overseas procurement operations in India. And he feels India is a really, really good untapped market for organizations that are looking to offshore some procurement services. So I was having him talk about the market and why he's seen so much success there. He's been a consultant for over 30 years, primarily working with organizations on Oracle. So these are definitely what I would consider enterprise or larger companies. And I asked him, I said, what percentage of the companies that you've worked with buy software, not just procurement software, but company-wide, and don't use it? He said around 80%.
That number tracks with me. Yeah, that number 100% tracks with me. Because I have seen this, especially when IT is driving the purchasing decision, whether it be Oracle or a cloud platform provider or a business intelligence visualization tool. I see that every day, up and down and all around. And the telltale sign, I love this, walk into a client and there'll be a bunch of clients in the room and inevitably it comes up, oh, well, we just rolled out Power BI and everybody took a training last week. And within a month, I know that absolutely nobody in that room will be using Power BI or whatever Tableau, or it doesn't even matter what the tool is. And yeah, it so often, especially when it's driven from either the center down or from IT down.
So I guess that begs the question, in your experience being a consultant for so long, working with many, many different types of organizations, why do companies buy software and then never implement it?
If I knew the answer to that, I would be a lot richer. I would be rich. I'd be retired. Look, well, I think a lot of times software is bought out of fear, and like the first thing in my book about consulting, whenever I write it, is going to be the whole trick to selling consulting is to generate fear. And I can sell anything with fear now, or I can make money by selling fear, I should say.
AKA the pandemic.
Right, exactly. And AKA the entire risk management space, or the tooling space, which in our last episode I took a bunch of shots at. So yeah, you can certainly get people to, fear, and maybe even to some degree the ESG space is like this. It's like, okay, fear, fear, fear. And all right, well, let's buy something to address, to check the box, to say we have an answer. I mean, I watch, if you go back in my career 10 or 15 years, when big data was a thing, it was when nobody had an answer or knew what to do with it, but we were sure as heck going to buy something to say that we had an answer, because every massive enterprise wanted to be the quote unquote Moneyball organization. So everybody's running around trying to, buy whatever software, even though none of them got adopted or even implemented. And I watched all these quote unquote big data companies just fall by the wayside.
It kind of makes me think of the AI craze and buzz right now. Everyone's scrambling, running around trying to check the box for AI. Now, I don't necessarily think AI is going to fail. I do think there's some good use cases and adoption for it, but it's kind of a similar thing happening right now.
100%. And the worst, you have all the software, and then what you get is all this. You get the hype machine. So you've got the analysts hyping this. You have the consultants hyping this. So it's a bigger ecosystem of hype and chaos. And I tell when I do workshops all the time, and then when I travel all over, and the thing I tell is when we get to the Gen AI or the AI section, I'm like, do not go to LinkedIn to read anything about Gen AI from anybody that writes on LinkedIn. There's nothing of value that gets written about Gen AI on LinkedIn. That is just self-promotion, or whatever company you work for promotion. If you want to learn Gen AI, do it. And if you don't want to do that, then at least go to YouTube or somewhere else. And I think that gets at this just hype and fear, or fear of missing out. And we just have to get past that, because it leads us into bad buying decisions.
So for me, to answer that same question, piggybacking on your comment around the fear piece, I think a big reason for failure is that it's not a strategic decision. Organizations are making compartmentalized decisions when they're buying software. So for example, IT, which you mentioned earlier, says we need a supplier management solution for all of our IT vendors. Then they go out and buy something specifically for that, instead of buying something broader and larger and more strategic that can be leveraged and utilized company-wide. So then what happens is it's not coordinated and it's not consolidated.
So I'm going to give you the counter narrative. We were just joking before we got on air that we hadn't been disagreeing, but I'm actually going to disagree with this one.
Oh, good. Bring it on.
Because I think you need fit for purpose. And I think you actually brought up a really interesting point, because I agree with you. IT shouldn't be putting on their deploying a vendor management solution. It should be, but I think that's a case of where IT is overstepping into procurement's boundaries. But I think if you have Microsoft OpenAI and all this stuff at the enterprise level, which is good. And you have all these ProcureTech apps. You still need something in between that is fit for purpose. And this is a challenge we've been running into lately, where ServiceNow and Pega and the other business process management platforms are trying. They are enterprise strategic buys. But when you try to deploy them for procurement, they're just either overkill because they've got 10 gazillion features, or they're just not geared or relevant enough to procurement. So I think as you get to there has to be some layer of fit for purpose. So again, shout out to process orchestration, but there has to be some sort of fit for purpose by discipline, whether it's procurement or HR or IT.
So I would say that I've seen things done in silos, and then the stakeholders are not involved when it's not a strategic decision. So someone buys a piece of software, it's done kind of in a vacuum, and then the stakeholder wasn't involved in the process, and they're told to or asked to use something they weren't bought in originally. They say, no, thank you. System never gets deployed and used.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think that's one of the as you look at British Telecom in their digital garage, that's one of the things I think they've done really, really well, is engaging the business early on in the decision. And so you certainly follow them, or you can read the case study I wrote on them. And I think it does, because I agree with you. Too often there's siloed endeavors that are just not connected to the business at all, which is, by the way, what IT has a tendency to do. That's their default position.
Well, and then not enough due diligence gets done. So when they buy something, even if the stakeholder is interested, it may not even serve the purpose that's needed. And then they're in this hurry up and get it implemented mode, instead of going back and looking at what problem do we actually have and how is this going to solve that problem.
And I'll build on that, because you get the other dynamic of, okay, we've identified that we need X feature, and the business says we need this feature. And when you have a ProcureTech, let's just talk about ProcureTech for a second, fit for purpose does this thing, and they go to IT, and then IT goes to their ServiceNow or Oracle or SAP, and the message, of course, the salesperson for those big enterprise apps says, "Oh yeah, well, we do that.
We do everything."
Yeah, exactly. Or what my favorite, oh, what's on the roadmap? It'll be here in 6 months, which is complete by the way. And this gets me worked up. So we'll see if we can bleep that out.
5 years in waiting, and it's still not ready.
Right, exactly. Like what, thank you, SAP Ariba. And so that's the other trick that IT will do, because they don't want to lose relevance, and they want to push the SAP, ServiceNow, Oracle big enterprise thing, and saying it can do everything when you talk to the business. And it's just dreadful. It's absolutely dreadful when you see this stuff.
I think another thing, getting back to why implementations don't even ever happen, is there's not a clearly mapped out plan around what does good or success look like.
Yep.
So if you
which sounds so obvious, but because we all think we know what success is, and it's not defined. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, and in my world, in marketing, a big struggle and challenge sometime is showing ROI, right? If you're doing a brand initiative or you're running a campaign, having a direct tie back is not always the easiest thing to do. So I have empathy for situations and people like that, but I'm talking about just nothing mapped out, no plan. So if there's no plan to measure what I'm going to get from this, one, why is the stakeholder going to prioritize this if they're not understanding how it's going to impact their business outcomes and their goals? And then what happens is no one follows up for a while. So then no one's measuring and monitoring, and it just kind of collapses.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, time and time and time again.
So, second part of Alex's question now, kind of pivoting from the implementation doesn't even happen to we buy software, we implement it, and then we struggle to get user engagement, or we have some user engagement, but we're definitely not leveraging the system to its full potential. What are you seeing as some of the core reasons why this happens?
Well, since I started my answer to the last question by bashing consultants, I think I'll do it again here. And I literally 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago, had this very question from a client, and they told me what they're doing, and they built this great data foundation, and they've done all this stuff, and they bought all this ProcureTech, and they have all this cloud platform stuff, and they can't figure out why they're not getting adoption, and it really comes down to a couple of things, but they've been told, and they've built to the spec. They've built to the spec of what they've been told by consultants and analysts and other pundits that say, this is your quote unquote best practice. Build the data foundation, buy these tools, and do X, Y, and Z, and then you will have a system. But that's nonsense. I mean, those are not, they haven't done anything wrong. They just haven't solved the problem for the business. And I write about, and I do research into why digital transformations fail. And and one of the reasons is we do all these quote unquote best practice things without the end user in mind. And whether it's building a bunch of dashboards or building a bunch of processes that people don't follow. And so then you start to peel back the onion and realize they're missing a core component that translates all this powerful technology to the way the business operates. And so they're missing a core piece of middleware technology, but also the second part of that is oftentimes, and I have this great joke or meme that I use in my presentations, that we put that burden on the end user. The end user has to figure out X, Y, or Z, or the requisition form has 36 fields, or the intake form has 36 fields, and we're putting a huge burden on the end user. End users are not going to do that, and they're going to hate you for it. And so oftentimes when we put these archaic SAP, Oracle interfaces, I mean, that tells your audience that you hate them. And so we have to start to, but you compare all of that to, say, an Apple product or a Google product, where all their engineers do is reduce the complexity on what the user sees. And I think that's the main difference. And because I'm going to bash IT a little bit more, IT does that because they want one Oracle system, they want one SAP system, and that comes at the expense of your end user.
Well, and I would say that we have this challenge around bad data, dirty data, yet we have systems that people can't use.
Yeah.
And then we're wondering why we're struggling when we're not making it easy for the end user to input things in a way that will help us clean our data and keep it clean.
Okay. Oh, yes. So this is the episode where Elouise is going to blow a gasket. So I apologize for going on yet another rant. So the way I know that supplier master data initiatives are going to fail is when either the client or the client's IT tells me, oh, we're using Informatica or some other master data management system. Because I know exactly that it's going to fail, because IT thinks that they can manage supplier master data or vendor master data, but they can't, because it's not dependent on them. It's not a cleansing effort like you might have for materials or for products or other things, other sort of master data. Because supplier master data, it requires constant updating from the supplier, which has nothing to do with your IT. In fact, it's outside the firewall. So you're never going to be able to get that data from the supplier, especially if you give them a garbage interface, which so many of these legacy tools are. And this is where I have such issues with IT, because they just want to command and control master data, but not understand that 98% of supplier data, master data, comes from outside your firewall. And so that's how I know very quickly that this is not going to ever work. And so, especially for supplier data, which is, again, most of the data that we in procurement outside of transactions, that's our core to our ability to do our job. We have to work in conjunction with the suppliers, which actually means working with supplier networks, or more broadly, solutions that allow suppliers a better experience in exchanging and eventually owning their data. And sorry for the rant here, but that's what we have to get at, because otherwise you're just going to always have perpetually bad data. And I am not having it.
Well, so then the question becomes, you have all these solutions out there that, quote, scrape the internet and update your data. So to go back to your point, if the clean data requires an actual input from the supplier, but you're saying you're just scraping the internet and plugging the data in, are systems and tools like that even relevant?
Not overly. And I say that knowing that I've just offended a bunch of people that I admire. But yeah, that's not the answer. And the answer, I mean, I just alluded to it. Ultimately, I would argue I have to have the data in my own wallet, and I will I will share it with you for the duration of while we're doing business together. And then I will take my data back, because you don't get to profit off of my data. And it's in my own interest to keep that data updated, but I'll update it in my wallet, and I'll share it when and how I want.
So is this along the lines of this whole idea of a digital wallet, and there being a potential opportunity for somebody to capitalize on a solution in this space?
Oh, 100%. And this is true, by the way. Forget business to business. This is true in our consumer world. Again, the joke is if you're not paying for a product, you are the product. And what that's saying is Facebook and Twitter and TikTok are using your data to profit. And I'm not criticizing them. That's just a fact. And over time, we as consumers need to be able to own our data and say, all right, if TikTok, you want to use my data, then I want some benefit for it. Now, they'll argue that I'm getting to use TikTok for free. And that so eventually that same thing has to apply to businesses too.
Which we're getting a little bit off topic, but that comes back to companies that have sold for billions and billions of dollars with having no physical product and just selling data that they've captured from suppliers or consumers.
Right. I mean, and Uber's the next level of that, where they don't own the assets, the cars, and they don't own the data, which is all of our data and the driver's data, yet they use it to have built a phenomenal business model, Lyft too. So yes, we have gotten wildly off topic, but I do want to get back to this user adoption thing, because it is important that we actually make the end user experience seamless. Because if it's easier for me to do the right thing, I'll do the right thing. But right now it's so hard. We make it so hard to do the right thing, especially when it comes to purchasing or just doing procurement-based work.
And I would say part of that involves the intelligence piece. So having a little bit of insight to know I'm in marketing. So marketing people historically have needed or wanted or done these things. So making it have some intelligence in the process versus just an open field where I'm trying to figure out and navigate what I'm going to do next. I almost want it guiding or recommending what other people like me have done. Doesn't mean I necessarily am going to do that, but I maybe want to know. And I think I've used this example before. I liken it to Amazon recommendations. I go onto Amazon, I make a purchase, and then it pops up, people have also purchased these items with this product. Now, I may look at it and say no interest, but oftentimes I have looked at the recommendations and said, wow, that's actually useful. I may purchase that. To me, that's intelligence built into the process.
100%. And that gets at my point about bringing a smart user experience. You and I both have Netflix accounts, and your Netflix looks different than my Netflix. And it's not because there's different versions for Sarah and Elouise. It's because it's one tool that customizes and reacts to each of us. And the tool, you have an intelligent tool when it's an audience of one. And I don't care about your Netflix. I care about my Netflix, and I want the best experience for me. And Netflix has done a great job, and Amazon and all the others have done a great job.
You want to talk about a company who just crushed their algorithm. I mean, TikTok, you're on there for an hour and it knows who you are and what you like and what you do. And it's feeding you things that you're like, how do they even know this about me?
Oh my God. Like I'm addicted to TikTok, and I marvel at TikTok's ability to guide me in various directions.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's fascinating. And I didn't even understand it at first. I'm like, why am I seeing this and that? And yeah, that algorithm is dialed in.
And YouTube is similar, right? You go on and your feed is going to look like, whatever the searches and things that you're interested in. It knows it, and it's feeding that to you, not only in your feed, but in the ads. YouTube has multiple algorithms running for the different components.
Sidebar today is all about sidebars. But I'm scared, deathly scared of snakes, because I stepped on a rattlesnake when I was younger. And
did you get stung?
No. I fortunately, but I've always had just this petrifying fear of snakes, and yet somehow I on YouTube Shorts has been showing me a steady diet of this guy that is hunting the invasive snakes in the Florida Everglades, and I forget
your worst nightmare.
Right. But I can't stop watching this guy because somehow YouTube and I'm vegan too. So like the idea that this guy's hunting, so but yet I can't get enough of this guy's content because of, he's educational, and he's not hurting any, animals, at least on camera, but it's like somehow that algorithm knew that I would like this, and it's like, yes, give me more. I need more of this.
And going back to the user adoption, if you could tie that same philosophy into ProcureTech, right, we wouldn't be having this conversation today.
Exactly, 100%. And I want to just, because you brought up data a moment ago, I want to build on that, because stop me if you've heard this one before, where we've put in a BI tool or visualization tool, and even maybe some analytics of predictive modeling or whatever, optimization or should cost. And well, maybe not should cost, but anyway, we do all this sort of technical analytics stuff, but the business doesn't adopt it. And it's because we are either using sophisticated tools or using the centralized data science resources and trying to push it to the business. And I think I know that I've watched that fail for 15 years, and it's never going to work. We have to actually bring the business to the analytics and data science. And to do that, we have to understand the data value chain, which starts with data. We have data, and then we visualize the data, which just tells us what the data is that we have. We have so much of this versus that, versus this is happening versus that's happening. And 90% of folks stop at the visualization. And when I hear, oh, we have a dashboard for this or a dashboard for that, yeah, but you're just visualizing your data. We haven't gone to the next level of analytical modeling. And even if you run all your data through these analytical models, it's still disassociated from your strategy. So unless you actually marry up the analytical outputs with a strategy, then you're not going to actually, then none of that data is going to be useful, or you're not going to become analytically driven. And so to do that, where does the strategy sit? The strategy sits with the business, and the business has to understand the power of analytics and go get the data and bring it in. And I would argue, and this is one of the reasons why I think Gen AI is legit, is that now we are starting to see the ability to bring sophisticated analytical modeling and data transformations that I can just ask ChatGPT to do it, and does it. And I think that to me is the big breakthrough, both intellectually in terms of driving adoption of analytics and data, but also in terms of bringing the business to it.
Well, and it goes back to the intelligence comment around giving data that you can actually action.
Right.
If you give me a bunch of spreadsheets or a bunch of dashboards, and I can't interpret what it actually means to me and how I can action on it, what use is it?
Right. Which to, like, you have to want to go get that data. If I keep pushing it to you, it's always going to be that same situation. I don't know how to action this. Why are you giving this to me? I don't understand this.
So going back to the second part of Alex's comment, I want to throw something else in the mix other than the user experience and the data piece. And this may seem like really, really basic and obvious, but I can't tell you how many times when I was working in marketing procurement software, that people in charge of doing the implementation, or kind of the project manager, would overpromise and set unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
Like, this is going to solve cancer and every single one of your problems, and you're only going to have to work, 4 hours a week after this is implemented. So be really honest and upfront with anyone who is going to be using the software that this is not the end all be all. It's not going to solve every problem, and that there's going to be hard work involved in getting there. And if you set that expectation up front, people aren't let down once the system is actually in place and they go on to use it and think, well, this doesn't do what I was told, so I'm not interested in using it.
I have the best example of this. So back in, I'm going to say 2015, one of my clients they made, this was before I was working with them. They bought Ariba, and Ariba guided buyer in specific, and they promised
which means they spent a lot of money.
Right. They spent tons of money, and the implementation took forever. They spent tons and tons and tons of money, but that like, I'm okay with that. Well, I'm not okay with that, but it's fine. Like, whatever. But then they made the colossal mistake. They said, this is going to be the Amazon experience for the business. You're going to have this great Amazon-like experience. And they set those expectations so high, and the failure to deliver, or the delivery was so low, that disparity, that didn't sink anybody's career, but that pretty much, that procurement organization lost, credibility for, I don't think they've recovered from it. Now they still are doing their thing, but like, they're the goodwill of the people, that was just way too mismatch of promising X and delivering Y.
And if they had just in the get-go been really honest, here's what we think it's going to do. Here's what it's not going to do. This is going to be hard. It's going to take a long time. They probably would have had a very different outcome.
Totally. And that's just like the perfect encapsulation of this problem of overpromising and under delivering.
And
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'll throw another piece in there, is part two of that. So not only is it setting reasonable, clear expectations, but I think it's really important to have a mechanism for users to share feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Because end users, they want to be heard and they want to know that their opinion is respected and valued. And it doesn't mean everything they say is going to be actioned on, but it's important that people feel that their voice and opinion matter. So have some sort of forum or community, maybe it's a Slack channel, where you allow your users to provide open, honest feedback about the system, and that you have a clear way for somebody to assess, potentially incorporate that feedback and respond to people. And I often see not having executives involved is really helpful in this process. So you don't have executives involved in the Slack channel or this sort of forum. You want people to have a safe space. And again, this maybe seems like super obvious and basic 101, but if you don't have something like this, I've seen users or organizations really struggle to get users to adopt.
It's a great point. And people need a chance to vent. And as if you've put your heart and soul into deploying this tool and selecting the tool, and the last thing you want is to be criticized. But the fact is you also have to be open to that criticism. That's part of digital. That's part of creating, the creation process. You get feedback, or people tell you that, like, people tell me my ideas are crazy. And sometimes, like I have to just stop and say, all right, that's really good feedback. Thank you. And change. And it's the same is true for digital adoption. Sometimes the tools suck, or whatever we've created is terrible. And you have to have that mechanism for that feedback. Otherwise, it's the emperor's new clothes kind of scenario, where nobody's telling you that you're walking around without clothes. And guess what? If you don't set up that channel, that feedback is simmering out there, and it's getting communicated. You're just choosing not to be in the loop.
And then it becomes a toxic situation. This makes me think of a couple of years ago, a girlfriend of mine texted me and said, "Can I call you to rant about something?" So I'm like, "Of course, give me a ring." She calls me. I literally put it on speakerphone, put it on my desk. She just went off for 10 minutes about Coupa. And at the end of it, she goes, "Thank you so much for listening. I have no one that I can talk to about stuff like this internally, and it's been simmering in me, and I needed to let it out."
There you go. That's the perfect example. And I joke that I'm a digital therapist, because so many people do that. They don't rant like that, but they tell me their problems. I just oftentimes will sit and listen, and I will get just this same thing. I don't have anybody I can talk to about this, because if I go, it'll become a political situation or whatever, and they just need to be able to talk it out or think it out, or just have some acknowledgement that they're not crazy. And lots of people tell me, "Thank you for listening. I was feeling crazy."
So I think our takeaway here, as we close out our episode, for those that are listening, is communicate clearly to your users, set reasonable expectations. It's not all going to be perfect, and that's okay. And make sure you have a feedback loop without executives involved that gives the users an outlet to talk about their frustrations and challenges.
All right, I have one more to add to the list. We also have to be honest about what we're rolling out. And company that I worked for rolled out SAP and the finance module, and the number of executives I saw championing this and patting themselves on the back. And I often joke that the tool is horrible. The technology is old, and I can't figure this thing out. The user experience is miserable. So of course, my way of venting is just to embarrass the firm and SAP every chance I get I include a screenshot of how bad the interface in my presentations. And the reason I mention this is if we were really honest and we looked at these user experiences, we'd realize that no amount of training is going to improve adoption of this tool. And to the point, if you have to train people on the digital tool, then you have the wrong tool, or you haven't completed the solution. Okay, fine. You roll out SAP, you roll out Oracle, fine, whatever. But you better add another layer that's going to improve that user experience, or else you are just going to have a very discontented population that's not going to use the tool. And guess what? I do not use our SAP system because I can't figure it out. I'm frustrated, and that's not how I'm going to spend my time. And so I think you have to, if you're deploying these solutions, you got to be honest about what you are deploying, which gets to your earlier point too, Sarah, of don't oversell the expectation. But even if they would have rolled out and said, this is going to be the most painful user experience ever, I still would be pissed because I'm not going to use a tool that is just so cumbersome and difficult to use. And so to summarize my rant here is that you have to look at it with critical eyes and say, is this easy to use? And if it's not, then I need a roadmap to, okay, fine, deploy your big tech solution. But then also, here's the roadmap to making that user experience better. Because if you don't do that, you get one shot at adoption. And if you don't hit that one time, and if it's not intuitive to use, I'm never coming back. There is zero chance I'm ever going to use an SAP tool, because they had one shot at this and that was it.
It's like a retail customer. If you're selling makeup and you lose a customer, good luck ever getting them back. Once they've moved on and found something else, it's really hard to get a customer back. To your point, do you think part of the problem is the final executive who's actually approving the budget and signing the contract is not testing out the software themselves? So they're not even understanding how atrocious it is to use?
Totally, because they're getting the beautiful PowerPoint and the very curated demo that, look at this, and we're going to have this, and we're going to have that. And even to be fair, the executive, they're probably not even looking at it. Like, they probably don't have the capabilities to understand what to extrapolate what this might be for rank and file. And or they convince themselves that, oh, we had to do, I think we had some old mainframe, so we had to like do some, I don't even know what it was, but we just have to do this. So we convince ourselves we have to do this, when in reality, it's like, well, wait a minute, let's just like pause here for a second. Maybe we have to do something, but maybe are we really doing this? But yeah, the executives are almost always disconnected from the end result. And to put it in ProcureTech space, like, go to a requisition form. Most requisition forms are horrible because we as procurement we're disconnected from that end user experience. And we need 36 fields filled out. Good luck. And I'm going to complain or write you up because you didn't follow the process. Well, hey, we should look in the mirror first.
Yeah, I almost want to challenge any execs that are listening to our podcast. Think about adding a step in your buying process to use the software yourself as part of the buying decision. If you've got your top 3, say you'd like to go in and spend 30 minutes on a demo environment. Doesn't mean you need to be able to know everything about, the end result, but can you log in? Can you figure out where to click around? Can you do basic things? And if you can't, I guess then that's a broader question. Should you be rolling this out for your team or your company?
100%. And that's why, like, when I do all this Gen AI stuff, I anchor it in me, and I of course record this stuff. I anchor it in me doing and trying this out to see if this is really legit. And when I think about the finance system, the SAP that we rolled out, I can barely remember where the URL is to go to the site. And half the time it doesn't work. I have to log into VPN. Like, there's all these other, like, there's these impediments. And then when I log in, the first screen takes 2 minutes to load because it's actually loading Java applets, were a thing back in like the late 1990s. And there's SAP is still using this technology. So yeah, like you have to be really honest about what this experience is, and you as the leader or whoever is responsible for this should be using this tool for a couple months. And I've started to see this now, just sort of putting on a sales hat. I see this with Salesforce now. Salesforce is kind of struggling because their interfaces haven't kept up with the times either, and you're starting to get sales organizations like slip away from that cohesive management that was such a breakthrough in the early 2000s.
So there is a system that a lot of organizations use for their marketing departments. It's called Marketo. It has a direct integration with Salesforce, and it's email. So most large organizations that are sending outbound emails from a marketing or product perspective, you want to talk about the most archaic, atrocious system. I challenge anyone to try to log into Marketo and figure out how to build and send an email cadence. I mean, it gives you a migraine. It makes your head hurt. And I'm shocked that a system, an organization that large and that big has not spent time to update their user interface and make it simpler for their end users. Mind blowing.
Well, again, yeah, no, exactly. And it gets to this thing of, at a certain point, these big tech companies just treat the users like or their customers as ATM machines. Just get the cash. I want the invoice every year because I need a new Mercedes or a new BMW, and we lose sight on the end user experience. And this gets back to, I think, in our last episode where we're talking about are these companies really innovating, or when they get to this certain middle-age level, do they just load it up with cash and just go around collecting cash versus solving problems? Because the two are different, vastly different endeavors.
Yeah, and I would say, look what happened to Blockbuster, right?
Yeah. Well, and in retrospect, it looks like so obvious. This experience of, I have to drive somewhere, I have to rent a tape, I have to rewind the tape. For those of you that are older like me, you remember rewinding tapes and the Be Kind rewind, like that, versus, oh, this thing just showed up in the mail. Or even better now, I just can do it on my computer or I download it on my phone. Like, those were monumental user experience changes that Borders and Blockbuster, they missed it. They just couldn't see beyond we're making tons of money right now.
And the reason I threw Blockbuster in the mix is I found my Blockbuster card recently. And I had to triple check it. And I'm like, wow, when I was in high school, that's how, I'm 41, so not that long ago. I mean, that's how we rented movies. And now they're a dinosaur and archaic. And I just kind of equate that to software. You need to have a really good user interface and stay relevant, or you will become obsolete.
At a certain point, the fundamental user experience has to change, because Blockbuster was built around going into the store. And at a certain point, it was no longer, with the internet, we were never going to go back to the stores. And we're seeing a little bit coming out of coming out of the pandemic. We're never going to be at that space where everybody goes back to the office 5 days a week. Now, how that's going to shake out. But if we're building productivity tools, we have to think about and I don't think we fully wrapped our heads around it. We're probably going to experience another blockbuster moment, though I don't think we can see it exactly at the moment.
Yeah. All right. Are we anything else we want to throw out there before we close out today?
No, I think this was a, a lot of fun. This elicited a lot of passion from me on this topic. And it was funny. I literally had a call a couple hours ago, and also, like, this was really the crux of my career rebirth or reinventing myself recently. And I do think, just sort of back to this blockbuster moment, back in 2017, I realized that this idea that we'd buy one suite of software and it would solve everything, that clearly, that was another blockbuster moment. So I think we have to be very attuned to these broader changes. So anyway, great question, Alex. Thank you so much for submitting it.
Yeah, Alex, hopefully you'll inspire others to submit topics that are top of mind and I think would be relevant for us to discuss. We are trying to grow our YouTube channel. So if you are not yet subscribed, feel free to click the subscribe button. And we've also created a form if you have questions about something we've discussed in a previous episode, or like Alex, have a topic that you'd like to recommend. You can check out the show notes, fill out the form. I do promise we read each and every submission, and we will make sure to address as much as we can on future shows. With that,
and we do read the comments, and we do talk about it, and we text them back and forth, and all the messages. So thank you for all the messages you do send.
And Catherine messaged me this morning to let me know that we were actually featured in James Med's newsletter, and I had just pinged Dr. Elouise right before the show. So we do appreciate shout outs, and we are monitoring and watching notes and things that come in. So with that, we will see you next week.